Alrighty. Oh, I forgot to post. One sec. Let me turn this off here real quick so you can see what I'm going to be doing. First time. Don't mind me. I meant to send out a clarion call to a channel I'm in. Okay. So yeah, welcome back to Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fragath. And we're going to read from Interzone. This is the issue number 4 from 1983, spring of 1983. I'm going to read a couple selections from this, and I was thinking of some from, I want to say it was issue 2. Um, the truth is I can't remember. And here's the cover, and it's going to be a read-along. Um, Hopefully it's big enough to read. Honestly, it probably isn't. Actually, can I match this up a little? And then just tweak the. There it is. Window capture. That's a little better. A little more centered without cutting off the top so much. It's going to change every time I move the thing around, so just don't get too accustomed to its current positioning. Um, so yeah, I get a little more water in me. Hope people dug Hellburner and Heavy Time. Hmm. I sort of wish I hadn't been in the middle of reading a book, soup to nuts, because I did actually want to do a reading of, let's call it Helicopter Story for last month, for Pride Month. Um, but I didn't get around to it because I was in the middle of reading a book. Them's the breaks. Okay, so Interzone. Interzone magazine was a science fiction publication, European science fiction publication mostly. Um, Back in the 80s, 90s. I think they may have gotten to the new millennium. I'm not sure how long they went. I have a couple old issues floating around that I have saved. Um, but there is a brilliant archival project on archive.com, org, whatever, that's got a large number of the back issues of Interzone. So that is what I'm reading this from. So this is the cover of the issue. We're going to be going to the Calder Requiem. I think maybe on the deck of the Flying Bomb. I wonder what the Ur plant is like. With a title like The Ur Plant, I am intrigued. Lots of flickering images. That's doable. Okay. I'm gonna have to do a lot of adjusting, but hopefully I will not move things too abruptly. So this is the Calder Requiem by Alex Stewart. It's formatting. So none of these have I consciously read before, ever. Um, I've never read anything from issue 4 of Interzone before. So these are all going to be new. I'm going to be emphatically and pointedly, possibly poignantly, winging it. I have done this before, and I think it's fun because, oh, excuse me, because I'm experiencing a story for the first time, and so can you be too. Unless you've read any of these before, in which case, hopefully I bring something to the table. If not, well, sorry. I'm going to have that over here so I can see if someone posts anything. I did not have it up before, so if you're out there, hi. If you're not out there, bye. Okay, so without further ado, The Calder Requiem by Alex Stewart. T minus 3 days, 7 hours, 42 minutes. The phone rang, tearing harshly through the silence of the night. Calder reached for it, fumbling, and the receiver slithered through his fingers. He reeled it in by the cord. Oui, c'est Calder. A slash of moonlight fell across the bedroom. A few streets away, a dog began to howl. He listened quietly, hardly breathing, while his stomach contracted slowly in the dark. I'm coming in. He sat up, cradling the receiver. Simone stirred beside him as he swung his feet to the floor. Phil, what is it? They've lost a can. Her breath hissed inward in the darkness as he reached for his shirt. Oh my God! Has it? Not yet. He stepped into his shoes. But it's decaying fast. How long have you got? 3 or 4 days. He paused at the door, looking back. I'll call you as soon as I can. All right. Bye, love. He clattered down the stairs, and the front door slammed. Simone lay awake, hugging a pillow for the rest of the night, while the bed grew cold beside her. T minus 47 years, 3 months, 7 days, 11 hours, 36 minutes. Philip! He looked up, sighing. His mother was crossing the paddock, a dark silhouette against the house lights. Philip, it's way past your bedtime. He pretended not to hear, absorbed in the harvest moon, hanging distended against the stars. His lips moved as he traced the markings. The sea of clouds, the ocean of storms, the bay of rainbows, the sea of tranquility. The eagle has landed. Philip! He started. Come on in this instant! Oh, Mum, just 5 more minutes, please. His mother sighed. Don't be difficult, Philip. You know we've got people coming. But I can see Venus. Look. She sighed again and peered through the telescope. A pale, shining crescent, floating alone in the infinite dark. It's very nice. Now be a good boy and come in. But I want to look at Venus. It'll still be there tomorrow. You can look at it then. I suppose so. Sulkily, he gathered up his belongings. Then he stopped, looking up at the stars. They wheeled above his head, untouchable, indifferent, and glorious. One day, he said, I'm going to be a spaceman. T minus 3 days, 4 hours, 26 minutes. The conference room was filling fast, grim-faced men and women talking rapidly in groups. Most of them were rumpled and sleepy, waiting desperately for the coffee to work. The director, tall and gaunt, beckoned to Calder as he stepped through the door. Phil, how's it going? Calder shook his head. It's somewhere in the firing circuits. The kick motor didn't kick, that's all. We're still looking for the fault. Well, I hope to God you find it. The director turned, introducing his companion. This is Paul Scarron, Phil. This is Paul Scarron, Phil, NASA liaison. They shook hands, smiling sheepishly. You're the new man, aren't you? Scarron nodded. That's right. I'm taking over from Delvin. I'm taking over from Devlin. Oh, it is not doing page down. There we go. We'll miss him. Everyone liked Mark. The director rapped the table with his knuckles. The hum of conversation died, replaced by a scraping of chairs. He coughed. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to call you in at such an ungodly hour, but as some of you already know, we have a problem. Scarron leaned towards Calder. Oh, it's in French. Okay. What's he saying? My French isn't any too good. He's just filling them in. Calder smiled sympathetically. Don't worry, you'll pick it up. The director leaned against the table, resting his weight on his palms. Mr. Scarron has the American side of all this. Mr. Scarron? Calder nudged him. You're on. English will do. Scarron climbed reluctantly to his feet and hesitated. So far as we know, the launch was perfect, but the can failed to make the right orbit. He licked his lips. It's too low for a tug to pick up and too large for a shuttle. A missile strike's out of the question. Several people nodded. And it's coming down. In 3.5 days, it starts to burn. His eyes flickered around the table, meeting the faces. Some shocked, some impassive. So, he tried to force a grin. Any suggestions? T minus 33 years, 4 months, 7 days, 9 hours, 17 minutes. Astronautics? What on earth for? Oh, is that the mother? Oh, it's not his mother. Okay. Astronautics? What on earth for? Because I want to. Does there have to be a reason? He turned away from the window. Outside the hall, the campus was basking in a final spasm of autumn sun. Most of his friends were lying on the grass or throwing bread at the ducks on the lake. Andrea pouted, sprawling on her unmade bed. But what can you do with it? Honestly, Phil, you never bother to think things through. And you do, I suppose. He hefted one of her textbooks, Comparative Economics, Theory and Practice. So, what would you suggest? Cybernetics, or control engineering. She fiddled with her crucifix. She always wore it, even in bed. With all the new power stations coming in, Daddy says, I know what Daddy says. Space is a waste of time. No money in it. That's not fair. She sat up, glaring at him. Sorry, no money for engineering graduates in it. Why are you always so rude about him? He likes you, Phil. He does, really. No, he doesn't. He just hides it well. Calder shook his head. You never give him a chance. He never gives me one. He turned back to the window. Our values are different, that's all. You're impossible. She threw the pillow at him. You're all right then. Take astronautics. See what good it does you. T minus 2 days, 11 hours, 53 minutes. That's it then. Calder laid the sheaf of papers gently on the director's desk. We can't clear it from the ground. You're sure of that? The director looked up at him, his face skeletal. He fumbled a tablet into his mouth. Calder nodded. Absolutely. So what can we do? Calder shrugged. Pray a little? T minus 30 years, 8 months, 3 days, 7 hours, 21 minutes. Are you out of your mind? Andrea stormed through the tiny flat. "After all the trouble he's gone to, found you a really good job." "I've gone out and got one on my own. On my own merit, too. He'll probably have a stroke on the spot." Calder vanished into the bedroom.
"What do you expect us to live on, for God's sake?"
"My salary." He'd taken a suitcase from the wardrobe and started to pack his underwear. Andrea stood, red-faced, in the doorway, glaring at him.
"I can't live on that."
"I can. Shirts, shaver, toothbrush."
"Well, that's just typical of you. Self, self, self. Why don't you think about me for a change?"
He glanced up. "I did, all the way back from Paris." He carried on packing.
"And?"
"I'm taking the job."
"Oh, are you? Well, listen to me, Phil. If you go to Paris, I'm not going with you, and you needn't ever bother coming back."
"I thought you'd say that." He snapped the case closed and smiled at her. "Lucky I only got the one ticket, isn't it?" T minus 2 days, 7 hours, 32 minutes. "Can I come in?" Calder looked up through the steam of his coffee cup. Scarron was leaning round the door of his office. "Of course. Sit down. Coffee in the pot."
"Thanks."
Scarron pushed a handful of papers aside, making room for his cup. He hesitated for a moment and leaned forward across the desk.
"Listen, Phil, I think you should know. Jerry just called from Washington. Strictly unofficial."
"Sounds serious."
"It is."
"SAC have been asking for figures, like for an intercept." "What?" Calder knocked his cup over, drowning the desk. "They can't be!"
"But they are."
"But the fallout!" Scarron shrugged.
"They say it'll happen anyway."
"Not across half the bloody hemisphere!"
"I know. Jerry's trying to stall them, but unless we come up with something soon, they're going to try it."
He glanced at the stained and soggy papers.
"What are you working on, anyway?"
"Just an idea." Calder yawned and refilled the cup. "Take a look. See what you think." T minus 30 years, 8 months, 1 day, 16 hours, 52 minutes. "Delighted to see you again, Mr. Calder." The director shook his hand firmly. Oops. Calder looked down at his bald patch. With his full moon face, the little German reminded him of Friar Tuck. "I'm delighted to be back, and looking forward to getting started, I've no doubt." He leaned over and pressed the buzzer on his desk. "I've asked someone to show you around." The door opened behind him. Calder turned. "Mademoiselle Seros Simone, this is Philip Calder." T minus 2 days, 4 hours, 23 minutes.
"Monsieur Leray?"
Scarron's voice was hushed. The director looked up slowly. "What is it?" His voice was low and slurred with fatigue. Calder stepped forward. "We think we've found an answer. It's a bit of a long shot, but—"
"Better than no shot at all, better than no shot at all, right?"
Scarron took the papers and laid them on the desk.
"There's a Hermes on the pad at Kourou, isn't there?"
The director nodded. "I held the countdown, in case we could use it." "Oh, I held the countdown, in case we could use it."
"We can. Phil's team has the IT all ready for us."
The director picked up the papers. "Making a rendezvous isn't the problem. What does it do? What does it do when it gets there?" He looked up at Calder. "Puts a man aboard. We've found the fault now. I think we can fix it." The director shook his head. "I don't like it. Are these timings accurate?" Calder nodded. "Then forget it. It's suicide." "It's cutting it a bit fine, I'll admit." "Fine? He'd have 20 minutes at the most." "Before it starts to break up, and you know what happens then." "Oh." "Before it starts to break up, and you know what happens then." Scarron leaned on the desk.
What choice have we got? T minus 22 years, 7 months, 3 days, 5 hours, 18 minutes. You heard then? Oh, sorry. You heard then? He looked up as Simone slid into the booth beside him. She nodded. Oh, wait. It was him first. I'm sorry, Phil. I know how much it meant to you. That's the way it goes. He shrugged, toying with his empty glass. She squeezed his hand. You'll get other chances. You'll see. No, I won't. He shook his head. I saw the medical report. What did it say? Suppose I had an attack up there, or words to that effect. He forced a smile. Isn't this supposed to be our anniversary? It was the last time I looked. Well, we're not paying all that money for a babysitter, just to sit here and feel miserable, are we? Definitely not. Right then. Let's go. They rose and made for the door. Outside the dusk was fading, and the moon balanced gently on the rooftops. Calder stared at it and sighed. So close, Simone. I got so close. T minus 2 days, 2 hours, 46 minutes. What do you mean it's impossible? Calder twisted back from the window. Even I could do it. I know. The director slipped another tablet into his mouth. But not fast enough. It took 33 minutes in the tank. 33 minutes! Calder was pacing the room. That's ridiculous! But it's what it took. I'm sorry, Phil. It was a good idea. Calder sat on the desk. Let me try, Raoul. I've been in the tank before, and I know the system inside out. The director nodded. Why not? He reached for the phone. At least you know what corners we can cut. T minus 14 years, 6 months, 9 hours, 37 minutes. Daddy, you're late! She shook a finger at him and tried to look angry. And on my birthday, too. Calder smiled and ruffled her hair. Sorry, love. I got stuck at the office. That's no excuse. And then I had to go and pick something up. What? Where is it? Can I see? When we get back. Jenny! Simone leaned over the banister. Is that? Oh, good. Better hurry, Phil, or we'll be late to the curtain. For the curtain. 5 minutes. He bounded up the stairs. Where's Philippe? In his room. He's sure he can tie his own laces. Jenny giggled. He's been trying for half an hour already. Then you'd better go and help him. Go on. Her mother propelled her down the corridor and returned to the bedroom. You could have made the effort, Phil, just this once. I tried, honestly. Henderson wanted a word, that's all. Who? The new director. He wanted me to take over his old team. Phil, that's wonderful. She kissed him. Doing what? A new project, working with the Americans. He slipped into his jacket and reached for a comb. Nuclear waste disposal. T minus 1 day, 22 hours, 37 minutes. 21 minutes, 7 seconds. The voice echoed eerily in his helmet. Calder trod water for a moment, then struck out for the surface. It's an improvement, Phil, but it's still not good enough. I'm sorry. He broke the surface, floundering, as the waterlogged pressure suit began dragging him down. Then the divers had his arms and steered him to the side of the tank. Eager hands dragged him ashore and removed the helmet. It's near enough, Raoul. The director shook his head. It's over the limit. Way over. Of course it is. I'm not trained for this. Get an astronaut. We used one before. He did it exactly the same way as you. But he took 33 minutes. You know the system better. Then I'll have to go. No, it's out of the question. Calder stood, clumsy in the pressure suit, leaning on Scarron for support. Paul, you tell him. Scarron nodded. Phil's right. It's a fighting chance. It's suicide. He's untrained. We'll keep an eye on him on We'll keep an eye on the time. He can always get back to the ship if it runs out on him. The director shook his head. You'll die if you try it. Thousands could die if I don't. Calder smiled. Raoul, please. I like sleeping at night. T minus 11 years, 1 month, 2 days, 18 hours, 12 minutes. Of course it isn't dull. Jenny leaned across the table, fizzing with adolescent enthusiasm. The project's good for half the mark, so it's got to be something really exciting. The sun filled the old kitchen, striking highlights from her hair. Clair de lune floated gently down the hall. Philippe was getting tired of playing scales. Calder laughed. All right, what do you want to know? She bit her lip. Well, I know the basic principle. What happens to the cans once they reach orbit? One of the platforms sends out a SEP stage. They dock automatically. Where do they go? About halfway to Venus. Then they leave them in solar orbit, like asteroids. Clever. Can you get me some diagrams and things? I don't see why not. Calder leaned back in his chair, enjoying the music. He's getting pretty good, isn't he? T minus 1 day, 18 hours, 7 minutes. Simone lifted the phone on the second ring. Phil? Hello, love. How are you? All right. How's it going? We think we've found the answer. Thank God. Amen. The snag is, I've got to fly out to Kourou and work from there. I'll pack you a case. Sorry, love. There isn't time. I'm going straight to the airfield. Oh. I just wanted to talk to you before I go. I'm glad I... Hell, they're here already. Bye, love. Click. Au revoir. She replaced the receiver, wondering vaguely why her face was wet. T minus 19 hours, 23 minutes. The sun clawed at his eyes as soon as he left the shade of the aircraft. The forest had crawled to the very edge of the field, engulfing the complex. Pads and ancillaries stood out clearly from the air, in splendid isolation, like pebbles in a pond. The larger buildings were half overgrown, sinking into the jungle like Hollywood temples. Thin threads of concrete stitched them together, linked them to the wider world. He raised a hand to his eyes. A solitary jeep was racing down the runway. Nothing else moved. The thick, steaming air was ripe with the smell of kerosene, rotting wood, and baking metal. Dazzle stabbed his eyes as he turned his head, a thin, silver needle, impossibly fragile, growing up out of the forest. Pad 4. Journey's End. The jeep slowed to a halt beside him. The once white bodywork was spattered with mud, obscuring the agency logo. You're the passenger, right? The driver was young and cheerful, his shirt sleeves rolled up to the elbow. Calder nodded. You any baggage? No. The driver looked vaguely surprised and extended a hand as Calder clambered in. I'm Markham, by the way. Tony Markham, DLC. He gunned the engine and swung the little vehicle through a gap in the undergrowth. A broad, well-paved road appeared, carrying them smoothly to the heart of the complex. Is everything set? Markham nodded. Countdown's going well. We had a 10-minute hold a few hours back, but they've made it up somehow. Just don't tell the pilot, okay? Why not? They worry enough as it is. The Jeep swung into a slip road. That reminds me, who is the pilot? I don't know. Hang on. Markham reached under the dashboard, steering one-handed through a series of bends. He pulled out a clipboard and glanced at it. Duty crew roster. Just a sec. He ran an eye down the column. Here we are. 1-4. Genevieve Calder. Relative of yours? T minus 3 minutes. CRS up and running. Check. Jenny flipped a couple of switches, and the lights danced obedient before her eyes. TCR green. All systems nominal. Check. Copy? She listened for a moment, then turned to smile at her father. So, you finally made it. He nodded, fidgeting in his seat. I never knew the suits were so itchy. You get used to it. She listened to the voice in her headset. Confirm, I copy that. Laid in and set. She checked her instruments again. How's my baby brother these days? Fine. Doing very well. He's scoring the new Riffard film. I suppose we'll have to go and see it then. She made a few final checks. Calder shifted in his seat. Jenny, did you pull strings to be here? He nodded. No. 1-4's mine, hold or no hold. He laughed and glanced at the timer. It couldn't be right. It read 0 already. And the pressure flowed across him. He never knew for sure, but through the pounding of his blood and the muffled, faraway roar, he thought he could hear her say, But I would have done. T plus 1 hour, 47 minutes. Be careful, Dad. Jenny's voice echoed loud inside his helmet. Calder ignored it and squeezed the controls. His EMU fired, and he began a long, slow tumble to the left.
Don't worry, I've done this dozens of times in the tank. It's not the same.
She was right, of course. In the tank, he could still take up and down for granted. And the Earth wasn't there, so beautiful and so fragile, filling half his horizon.
19 and a half minutes.
It couldn't be. He checked his watch and sighed with relief. She was leaving a wide margin for safety. He gripped the controls again and accelerated towards the can.
It looks undamaged from here. Tumbling a bit, though. Atmospheric friction. Better get a move on.
He reached out, snagging a stanchion. A faint jerk, and he was with it.
I've boarded. 18 minutes to go. I know what bloody time it is.
He regretted it at once, not for Jenny, who knew he didn't mean it, but for the listening hundreds at Darmstadt.
The hatch won't come. It must have warped.
He dug in his pouch for a screwdriver, inserting the blade between the plates. The hatch sprang free and whirled away towards the earth. He looked up briefly to follow it. The Hermes hung below him, a few meters away. Jenny was watching him from the flight deck. He waved and turned back to the circuits.
It's burned out. Phil!
The director's voice, heavy with static.
Can you still fix it?
I think so. I'll have to bypass.
There isn't time.
Jenny cut in, clear and distinct.
You've got 14 minutes left.
That should be enough. He took out some wire and a pair of cutters. Now, let's see. He made the connections rapidly, twisting the bare ends of the wire together. So many to go. He glanced at his watch. 8 minutes. His fingers, clumsy in the heavy gloves, trembled with impatience.
5 minutes, Dad.
All right. He was sweating heavily. The last pair.
No good, Phil.
Scarron's voice.
Still a no-go here.
Damn it! Wait. He checked the connections. Some of the joints, made in haste, were loose. I think I've got it.
2 minutes.
For Christ's sake, Jenny, shut up! He twisted the wires together. Try it now.
Dad, leave it. Your time's up. Still a no-go, Phil. Dad, you've got to come back. Now.
Just a minute.
You haven't got a minute. It'll break up any second.
He was already pulling the Hermes up, angling the nose for re-entry. The can began to shake. Got it! He made the final connection.
Phil, it's cleared. Now get the hell out.
How long have we got?
Firing in 1 minute.
It won't hold together that long. He untwisted some of the joints he'd made and cross-connected them.
Phil, what?
He stared at the final pair of wires, held loosely in his hand. Then slowly he twisted them together.
Dad, no!
The motor fired. The glare punched through his eyelids before the visor had a chance to polarize. Then the shuddering stopped, replaced by a slow, steady pressure. He opened his eyes. Below him the Hermes glowed, a dull, sullen red, as it started its dive through the clean winds of Earth. His radio crackled.
Jenny?
Can you hear me?
Just about.
The wash of static grew steadily, even as he listened.
Goodbye, Dad.
Goodbye, darling. I love you all. Silence. She'd entered the blind spot. T plus 2 hours, 29 minutes. The tide of static finally receded. Hermes 1-4 laid in for threshold. Trajectory nominal. Copy? Jenny ignored it, frantically searching the wave bands. She found it at last, a brief, fading echo. Finally made it. She smiled then and understood. T plus 1 year, 5 months, 4 days, 11 hours, 32 minutes. So what did you think of the Calder piece? The Requiem? The critic shrugged and reached for his lighter. All right, I suppose. Nothing special. And that was The Calder Requiem by Alex Stewart. Yikes. Kind of a downer. But pretty good though. I was excited. Alex Stewart's first story appeared in Interzone 2. This is his second. Coming next issue, new stories by Richard Cowper, John Crowley, M. John Harrison, John Shirley, and others. Let me see how long. Oh, that's pretty short. We could fit that in. I think I'll probably do. Sorry, I realize this is skimming a lot. So I'll definitely do On the Deck of the Flying Bomb because with a title like that and a picture like that, I have to. And then I'll probably do the Ur plant, and we'll see what our time looks like at that point because that one looks longish. And that'll probably do it because this isn't going to be a super long stream today because I got stuff I got to do in preparation for what I'm doing for the next 2 weeks, which I will not get into at this time. I keep my online life and my life fairly separate. Ugh. Though there's overlap. Just getting some crunchy kinks out of my neck. Alrighty, so this next one. So what's difficult about these is on these scans, and I think they may have been AI upscaled in truth, because of some of the interesting consistencies in the way it does things, or doesn't do things as the case may be. So periods kind of get vanished and a few letters get mangled, like capital G's often register as C's. It's not super duper duper high quality. It's not like many megapixels in size, but it's good enough to read as far as I'm concerned. Alrighty. So this is On the Deck of the Flying Bomb by David Red. First evening. As a stowaway, hidden like an unseen parasite, I can use the lifeboat cameras to observe the workings of the flying bomb and its crew. My lifeboat is one bead in the necklace of 300 lifeboats strung along the rim of the upper deck no inquiring crewman will think to examine. What? There's probably punctuation there that makes that make more sense. Uh, my lifeboat is one bead in the necklace of 300 lifeboats strung along the rim of the upper deck. No inquiring crewman will think to examine my little hermit cell until I lift it from the deck and glide away. This is a strange behemoth that I shall be leaving, a creature so vast that on its deck there is no sensation of motion. The flying bomb is 4 miles long and 2 miles wide, and its curving underbelly is over a mile deep. On its upper deck the buildings form a large town where the crewmen live and work. On the lower decks the maintenance staff move like pale ants in caverns, tending the machines which keep this artificial world airborne. And further below is the unstable cargo which will explode nova-like when the flying bomb reaches its target. I shall reconnoiter through the nearby buildings like an enemy spy, not that I am an enemy, and through my espionage learn the best moment to escape. The lifeboat supplies include several one-size uniforms, so I can imitate the chameleon and change my disguise to suit my surroundings. However, on this first day, exploration in person would be too dangerous. I have studied the deck through the monitors. These well-spent hours have rewarded me with a full knowledge of the nearer buildings. The sick bay, kitchens, dormitories, and married quarters, recreation rooms, chaplain's cabin, and so on. Tomorrow, armed with this knowledge, I shall venture out. Second evening. Today I learned the location of the bridge, the nerve center from which information and commands radiate to all parts of the flying bomb. Emerging from my lifeboat, I walked through a sector appropriate to the hour to the uniform I wore. The buildings were like holiday chalets, with timber panels and shining windows in standard metal frames. The brown decking planks were solid under my boots, the polished sun-darkened bones of an entire forest. Crewmen passed me about their business, or came to life momentarily behind windows, but they did not query my presence. One man seen in the lifeboat would have demanded attention. One man seen in the crowd was nothing. I followed an unsuspecting officer who might lead me to the bridge, but he entered a restricted zone, and only my careful researches of yesterday saved me. Turning away, I wondered how the crewmen could avoid the myriad pitfalls inevitable in so complex an organization. In my journey I had passed signs, notices, training halls, even a squad on a shed construction. Even a squad on a shed construction exercise. But although I had seen these things, I had learned nothing. My learning began when I watched a private take something from a wall dispenser labeled information. I followed him and picked up 3 colorful booklets. An adjacent poster reminded me, "Do your duty. The penalties are severe." I retreated. In the sanctuary of a nearby recreation room, I examined the booklets. Location, organization, procedure. So this was how each crewman of the flying bomb was kept fully aware of his part in the system. All men had to keep themselves informed of their rights and restrictions. Failure was punished by loss of benefits or worse. These booklets gave me a complete knowledge of the basic organization. Every crewman, however newly recruited, was given the same knowledge, and theoretically could make himself master of the flying bomb. By studying these guides, I have prepared my route towards the bridge, the captain and the navigational data I require. Oh. By studying these guides, I have prepared my route towards the bridge, the captain, and the navigational data I require. I am amazed that this information is freely available. Most amazing of all, these booklets describe the enemy which the flying bomb will destroy. Third evening. Today I gained admission to the bridge. At first I roamed the adjoining corridors as a waiter, bearing beakers of coffee from one room to another. In this role I watched the rituals of relationship among the superior officers, and I memorized their undocumented gestures and procedures until I could mimic the symbols of power. In an empty washroom I became a lieutenant. On this stage there were set formulae for entrances and exits, the cues of which I had to learn. The cues of which I had to learn. No, there is no of. I added that. Sorry. The cues which I had to learn. Let's say the cues which I had to, the cues which I had to, the cues which I, I'm sick and tired of repeating that. I found a lecture theater opposite the bridge, and by joining some officers for a training session, I obtained a window seat overlooking the glass-sided central control room. While the other students took notes on the control of subordinates, I took notes on the bridge and its inhabitants. The navigating officers were extremely busy. During the session I also studied the lecturer and officers. They appeared unconcerned about their approaching doom when the flying bomb will destroy itself and its target. Perhaps they too were actors. The lecture on projection of authority aided my entry to the bridge. Outside the hall I noticed a private at the door of the bridge, struggling to trigger the door release while holding 6 coffee cups. I smiled and approached him like a true lieutenant, lifting 3 cups from his hands. "I'll take these, Private. You open the door." He obeyed swiftly and gratefully. "Couldn't find a tray, sir." "Next time, improvise something or make 2 trips." I followed him inside, my eyes busy as I set down the cups on the tabletop. The captain was instantly recognizable by his uniform and his authoritative bearing. Beyond him I saw 2 navigators at a display panel. But any delay here would arouse suspicion. "Remember what I told you, Private." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." And though it hurt me to go, I walked unhesitatingly out of the bridge. The incident had been excellent preparation for tomorrow. I returned to my lifeboat via the lower deck. Curiosity took me down to see the assembled power units. Levitory. Levitatory. I thought I was reading that wrong. Lev- I returned my lifeboat via the lower deck. Curiosity took me down to see the assembled power units, levitatory devices, and battle weapons. As usual, the crewmen were working with apparent indifference to their final destiny. One group of maintenance men had invented a new coupling lubricator. I was not sure whether to pity or to admire their pointless endeavor. Then I examined the cargo through a viewer, but the screen showed only more machinery, with camouflage nets and inspection ladders leaning downwards. The cargo itself was hidden further below. In all my travels I was unchallenged. My outward conformity ensured my acceptance. Fourth evening. The dream this morning upset me. I was in a metal coffin, floating within a greater emptiness. Beside me were 2 human skulls, shining in the darkness, one still wearing ancient earphones. I ached with sympathy for these lost creatures, but I could not help them. A voice whispered, "All dark past the Terminator. What have they done?" Then I awoke. I would never help them now. I walked to the bridge, still depressed by the dream. With little hope of success, I carried in some data sheets borrowed from the maintenance deck, and said that a manual check was required. To my surprise, the officers were very helpful, even demonstrating the operation of the display units.
And if you want any more checks at any time, come in again.
The bridge was crowded, and I had no chance to obtain the coordinates. Nevertheless, my time was not wasted. I overheard an argument between the captain and a senior officer. The officer wanted the captain to inspect our cargo, which served as both payload and fuel. The captain refused.
It's safer left alone. It needs watching, but it's harmless in itself. Not when we're burning it up.
Listening to this, my previous admiration for the captain lessened swiftly. He was a slave to his orders. The flight was scheduled to take 10 days, a slow journey, exposing the flying bomb to many outside dangers. Faster flight to reduce these risks would have increased the danger from the cargo. The captain mentioned this and said he was glad his orders had decided his flight pattern for him. I was sickened. A captain should make his own decisions. Even I, a stowaway, could do that. I was right in wishing to leave. Taking the data sheets back to the lower deck, I said the next batch would need checking tomorrow. Those papers would be my passport to escape. On the upper deck, a corporal stopped me.
Away from your post, Private. Where are you going?
Confused, I indicated my lifeboat. Just on my way back, sir.
Then jump to it. If I see you off limits again, I'll report you.
I hurried away, thankful the encounter had gone no further. But why had the ambassador of order questioned me? The booklets are silent. Soon it will not matter. The flying bomb soars on, a shadow in the sunset, over plains of rippling wheat, through the smoke of burning cities, onward to its doom. I am a temporary resident, and will soon depart. Fifth afternoon. It began perfectly. I collected the papers, went up to the bridge, and spent the coffee break with the navigators. I obtained both our position and the route to safety. But while I was still on the bridge, the captain called us all to the main vision panel.
It's happened, men. We were afraid of this.
I saw the image of a distant flying bomb, dark against the orange sky.
Collision course. We'll have to fight.
While he alerted the crew, I raced back to my lifeboat. Inside, I sealed the hatch and began the separation sequence. I cut the external power supply. To my horror, the internal power died. To my horror, the internal power died also. I reversed the switch and power returned. I wept. Yeah, missing punctuation makes this awfully hard. You can see them blurrily on some of these, but it's kind of tricky. Like there's semicolons, but most of them aren't appearing. I reversed the switch and power returned. I wept. The lifeboat drew its power from the flying bomb. Its independent reserves were a sham. I could never leave. But, other than that, my escape went perfectly. I am staying in the lifeboat. There is nothing else to do. On the monitors, I watch the approaching enemy. It could be a mirage, an atmospheric reflection of our own flying bomb, except that I can see the weapons of its lower deck puffing smoke, and can feel the detonations of shells bursting against our hull. The corporal just opened my hatch.
Don't you know your battle station? Get down and guard the payload.
He shouted his orders and disappeared. He is under the illusion I am a member of the crew. I shall remain here and watch the battle until Corporal returns.
Get down there.
I go. Oh, is that it? That's it. Okay.
David Red sold his first SF stories in 1966 and has published regularly, if not prolifically, ever since. He lives with his family in West Wales. Oh, he's Welsh.
So that was On the Deck of the Flying Bomb by David Red. That was cute. I get the impression of sort of a Victorian era steampunkish affair, which is neat. Let's skip towards the Ur Plant by Barrington J. Bailey. What time is it? We're okay. Yeah, we'll get through this. See what the time is. There might be one. I think it's issue 2. I wanted to read, but we'll see. So again, to reiterate, I have read none of these stories before. I am faking it. I think I'm doing okay. Well, I see the name Dr. Mengele already. That's off to a bad start. Hopefully it's not the same one. But if they're in Brazil, it could be the one, the only, the man, the myth, the legend, Dr. Mengele. Mad scientist extraordinaire. Oh, yeah. Brazil and the South America Andes, yep. Oh, yeah. Oh, boy. So this will be interesting. Well, let's go. The Ur Plant by Barrington J. Bailey. The man from Comodoro Rivadavia did not quite know what to expect as he alighted from his official vehicle in the center of the academic city. He assumed the man standing at the curbside was his host. But as he had never been in academia... What? Oh, it's a place called Academica. Academicia. There we go. He assumed that the man standing at the curbside was his host, but as he had never been in Academicia, he ignored him at first and scanned his surroundings, taking in the scene. The avenue was broad, crossed at intervals equally wide by equally wide intersecting roads. Beyond the varnished timber of the buildings, the lush dankness of the new forest made an indistinct backdrop. The Andean peaks were only faintly visible, shining ghost-like in the thin sunlight. "Senor Galtieri?" Shyly, the botanical geneticist stepped towards him. "I am Dr. Mengele. I am honored that you should find the time to visit me, when you must have so many pressing duties." He shook the official's hand warmly. "It may be your wish to inspect the city while you are here. Not really a city, of course, but definitely a town. I see you are taking an interest in the layout. Academia is divided into segments. We stand now in my own department, the Botanical Lodge. Over there," he indicated an extensive group of the ubiquitous darkwood structures, "is the Physics Lodge, which is the largest, while in that direction will be found the lodges for biology and for psychological studies. The Chemical Lodge is on the other side of the city, and so on. You know, Senor Galtieri, some visitors apparently think it incongruous for an entire lodge to be devoted to botany, a minor discipline in many people's eyes, but I assure you the work we have been doing here is of the utmost value. We—" Galtieri cut off his anxious pleadings. "I am here only to judge on your request, Doctor. I return to the capital in the morning." He cast a caustic glance into Mengele's florid features. "Do you think we could go inside? I find the air rather cold." "Of course," Mengele muttered, and led him through a veranda and into a dimmer interior which seemed little warmer than the outside. I will show you your quarters presently. But first, how about something to take the chill off things, hmm? He showed Galtieri a bottle of blended tequila, and at his nod poured 2 measures in tall glasses. And so, how do things look from Rivadavia? He said, with an attempt at camaraderie once they had drunk. We do tend to get out of touch here. Galtieri shrugged indifferently. Things are much the same. The Gringo fleet still lies off our shores. It still makes no move. Of course not, while our nuclear arsenal stands poised at readiness. The Nordamericanos have learned once before that we will use our weapons to defend our national honor. Mengele spoke the words vacuously. It was the sort of thing one was expected to say at moments like this. It is rumored that they seek to renew their alliance with Brazil. That could alter the complexion of things. The doctor put on a show of exasperation. Brazilians! Pah! Those Portuguese-speaking pigs are little better than gringos themselves. Besides, they are racially corrupt. Thoughtfully, he laid down his glass. Senor Galtieri, could this prejudice my request? Let me be frank. If the government orders blow for any further insult we receive, then there will likely be some nuclear retaliation upon ourselves. Academia could conceivably. In any case, I am anxious that my specimen be planted in the Amazonian Reserve, its most natural environment. But if Brazil is now to be our enemy.
Oh, that is not too much of a problem. Galtieri held out his glass for more tequila. We have had people operating into Brazil for decades. Anyway, the administration does not shrink from another war with Brazil. Have no doubt, if it comes, we shall regain both Buenos Aires and the province of Uruguay. Never shall we abandon our holy destiny.
To greater Argentina, murmured Mengele as they drank again.
And now, Doctor, do you mind telling me what is so special about today's date? Galtieri queried. You have exerted yourself considerably to get me here, so what's involved in this demonstration?
Knowingly, Dr. Mengele smiled. You will see, Senor Galtieri. You will see. May I suggest you rest for a while? My demonstration will not take place until midnight, and while I do not think it will last long, I do not want to tire you.
Very well.
Mengele's words put Galtieri in a bad mood. It displeased him to be told what to do, more or less, by an inferior. As a senior administrator, he was accustomed to taking orders from no one but the military.
We must humor you scientists, I suppose, and the trip has tired me a little.
While the chauffeur who had driven him from the airstrip carried in his luggage, Mengele showed him to a pleasant, quiet room in the same building. After turning on the small electric heater, Galtieri lay down on the bed and slept. When he awoke, several hours had passed, for he found himself in darkness, gazing at the faintly luminous window. After some moments he realized he had been awakened by a knock on the door. Stirring himself with an effort, he stumbled to the light switch. Then, blinking, he drew back the door panel. In the passage stood a slightly bowed figure, whose air of diffidence was not helped by the crumpled black suit he wore. With him he had a large black box which he had placed on the floor. He looked directly at Galtieri only once, seeming thenceforth unwilling to meet his eye.
Senor Galtieri, he began, I am Professor Borge. Dr. Mengele regrets he cannot entertain you to have dinner tonight. He is busy in his floricultarium. I have offered to present myself in his place. Senor Galtieri, may I come in for a few moments?
Wordlessly, Galtieri opened the door wider and beckoned him inside. Sitting on his bed, he watched the professor clumsily lug in the box.
What have you got there? He asked.
Something I am anxious to show you, Senor Galtieri.
Professor Borge's voice was retiring and rather high-pitched. so quiet that the listener had to concentrate in order to hear what was said.
I do hope you will not think I am trying to rival the good doctor. Your visit is, however, the opportunity I have been seeking to bring my own work to the notice of the administration.
He was unfastening the box's clasps and lifting out an oddly shaped apparatus. Galtieri knew he should be annoyed at the professor's presumptuousness, but instead he merely listened as Borges went on.
In many ways, Senor Galtieri, our academia is like one of the schools of ancient times, the Pythagorean Society or Aristotle's Academy. By that I refer to its interdisciplinarian dimension, which has been enormously fruitful. I myself am an ardent interdisciplinarian, added to which there is our relative seclusion from the rest of the academic world. This has been released. This has. This has released us from the dead weight of normal opinion, so that we have taken directions outsiders might regard as wholly too fanciful. Are you interested in philosophy, Senor Galtieri?
There was a long pause before Galtieri replied. Actually, I am, he said. As a matter of fact, it was his bedtime reading. He had a well-thumbed copy of Plato's Republic in his luggage right now.
Good. Then you might be interested in a project which some of us have discussed over the years in a theoretical way, the construction of a microscope. This would be the opposite of a microscope.
Do you mean a telescope? Galtieri interrupted, puzzled.
Not at all. A telescope discerns distant objects. There is nothing remarkable about it. No, whereas whereas a microscope makes perceptible the invisibly small, a macroscope would correspondingly make perceptible the invisibly large. Size is a cosmic dimension. We are suspended between the infinite and the infinitesimal, are we not?
Borges giggled softly.
One wonders what would be seen through this macroscope. Platonic forms, perhaps? The gods themselves?
Suddenly he blushed.
I beg your pardon, Signor Galtieri. I did not mean to be blasphemous. I meant angels, of course.
With a glance at the crucifix on the wall, Galtieri smiled sourly. That is all right. He turned his attention to the device on the table. It looked like a piece of abstract sculpture, a matte black box above which was mounted some sort of dull metal mirror or reflector, oval and concave, perhaps a foot tall and half as wide. So is that it?
Oh, no, Signor Galtieri.
Borges giggled again.
Merely a step towards it. You see, I alone have tried to take the project forward from the theoretical to the practical sphere. Early on, I came to the conclusion that to be effective, a macroscope must first of all be able to perceive. It is more than a simple focusing device. It would be some sort of staging apparatus, perceiving on a large scale. How, I do not know as yet, and reproducing its field of view on a scale discernible by ourselves. Luckily, my hobby is microprocessing, and so I applied myself to the difficult question of machine perception. The device you see before you is a crucial breakthrough, Senor Galtieri. It is a seeing machine.
I don't know what you're talking about, Galtieri said bluntly. My household cleaning robot can see perfectly. So can any industrial handling machine.
You misunderstand me, Senor Galtieri. Those devices do not really see. They only recognize. They operate by matching shapes, colors, forms, or else sounds, to an internally stored library. Our own brains do the same thing, but it is not the same as seeing. When we look at a familiar face or object, the recognition process is carried out automatically, without our knowing it. The result of this, as a gestalt, is what is then presented to our awareness.
Machines have no awareness. That is what you mean?
Exactly.
Borges wiped his brow in what was almost a gesture of weariness.
The construction of a machine with awareness seeing to coin a phrase, has consistently defeated microprocessor designers. The reason is that microprocessors operate in a manner radically different from the organic brains. They work sequentially, carrying out only one operation at a time. When confronted with a shape, for instance, the microprocessor scans it and then analyzes the results for geometrical features, which are then compared one by one with a stored list of such features. An attempt at identification is then made. It is all very time-consuming. Your cleaning robot, Senor Galtieri, recognizes things rather slowly.
So I have noticed. So I have noticed. Galtieri's sleepiness was dissipating, and with it his patience. Are you going to come to the point, Professor?
Of course, Senor Galtieri, of course. Borges wrung his hands nervously. But please bear with me for a short while. We must consider how seeing is accomplished in the human brain. First of all, it is not done sequentially, for the brain does not operate sequentially. It works on a branching principle or spreading nerve It works on a branching principle of spreading nerve nets.
That says or, but I think that's just, it's missing the top of the F.
One brain cell outputs its signal to anything between one and several hundred other brain cells, and with a single discharge may send a wave of excitation through whole cortical regions, arousing billions of cells simultaneously. The arrangement seems haphazard from one point of view, but it performs miracles despite the creeping rate of nervous impulse, which propagate at only 200 miles per hour. I reasoned that the multidimensionality of nervous interconnectivity is precisely what enables true perception to occur. Awareness is a holistic phenomenon. Instead of painstakingly analyzing information gleaned from the external world, as a microprocessor does, the brain maps external events to dedicated groups of brain cells. The mapping is one-to-one for every perceivable type of event. The mapping is one-to-one. For every perceivable type of event, there is a group of cells that responds to it. Thus, the external landscape is reproduced as an internal mapped landscape, and it is this that awareness consists of. Senor Galtieri, do you know the ancient phrases macrocosm and microcosm, so beloved of the alchemists? I believe they refer to the awareness process. The world at large, or macrocosm, is recreated in mapped or model form, complete with all relevant connectivities, as a microcosm in our skulls. I set out to accomplish the same artificially. I designed, in place of normal transistors, neuristors, with up to 100 connecting dendrites, and these I arranged in the necessary nets. I drew the masks myself, a labor of 2 years. They were reduced and put on chip with the assistance of the Applied Electronics Lodge. The architecture draws on brain anatomy rather than normal chip mapping, and being purely electronic, the machine has a marked speed advantage over the organic brain. From a quiescent state, an activating signal can spread to the whole ensemble in a few nanoseconds, the precise time depending on the nature of the signal. Incidentally, only one chip is involved. It is 9 inches square and has so many layers it is an inch thick. Have I made myself clear, Senor Galtieri? If there is anything you do not understand.
Galtieri stared incredulously. You are telling me that this thing is conscious? He demanded.
Not conscious, Senor Galtieri. Aware. Aware.
That is definitely a no. It's definitely aware, though.
Not conscious, Senor Galtieri. Aware. They are not the same. Our psychological lodge has definitely established that.
Seeing Galtieri's uncomprehending frown, Borges went on.
It turns out that consciousness, the faculty that makes you and I what we are, is a more elaborate construction than simple awareness. The latter is, so to speak, the basic building material of consciousness proper.
So what's the difference?
To put it at its crudest, consciousness is awareness with knowledge. There are additional components, memory, mental process, but above all, subject as well as object. Subject being the experience of the perceiving self. This I cannot duplicate as of yet. This machine is aware, but only of what it sees. It does not know of its own existence. Do you understand what this means, Senor Galtieri? The machine experiences the being of what it sees, but nothing else. It identifies itself perfectly with the object of vision, believing itself to be that insofar as it believes any what?
Why is there a question mark? I got really badly thrown by the question mark at the end of that paragraph.
It identifies itself perfectly with the object of vision, believing itself to be that insofar as it believes anything.
Oh, because it's a continuation of the previous question. Got it, got it, got it.
Is this not a difficult concept?
Galtieri asked, interested despite his doubts as to Borges' sanity.
Perhaps, but it is a real one. Try to imagine your own consciousness emptied of everything except pure awareness of objects, all sense of self gone, no thoughts present. That is something like it. The state can be induced by drugs or occasionally by meditation practices.
And you propose to advance from there to consciousness as we understand it?
The predominant feature of our consciousness, our awareness of individual self, proves to be curiously convoluted. I am a long way from duplicating it. But the first step is undoubtedly to provide a sense of continuity, and this is easily done by adding a memory facility.
Professor Borges stepped hesitantly to the machine and extended. Professor Borges stepped hesitantly. I'm so sorry. Professor Borges stepped hesitantly to the machine and extended a hand as though to give it an affectionate touch, or as though to bestow a benediction. He hesitated again, then turned the reflector to face Galtieri.
At the moment, the machine is aware of Senor Galtieri, he explained. It is Senor Galtieri, so complete is its identification with the object of perception. It is Senor Galtieri, so complete is its identification with the object of perception. But if I turn it elsewhere, it will instantly forget it ever was Senor Galtieri, and will identify itself instead with the next perception. By pressing this button, however, I bring memory into play.
He touched one of two studs at the base of the device. Then he rotated the concave reflector towards himself.
There! The machine now remembers the being of Senor Galtieri. That is its first identification. My own image is like a rival ghost being superimposed upon that of Senor Galtieri.
It sees you through me, so to speak?
Yes, you have it.
Galtieri grunted.
A somewhat specious version of a conscious self.
Indeed. Yet it may conceivably be advanced to the stage where the machine experiences itself as a true subject.
He depressed the second button, emptying the memory.
Actually, Senor Galtieri, I now take the view that the conscious self is a specious construct. It is a quirk. Simple awareness is more basic.
Is that curved thing what it sees with?
Galtieri asked.
That is its eye.
What would be wrong with a simple television camera?
It is a TV camera of the mosaic type, but of non-standard design. It does not need to scan, you see, since the processor does not require it. It also has a range of sensitivity greater than our own, several octaves to either side of the visible spectrum.
A mirror of being, Galtieri murmured. What a peculiar intelligence.
It is a triumph for Argentina, Senor Galtieri. I can say that without arrogance. We now lead the world in the field of machine perception. Senor Galtieri, I am hoping you will not forget this when the next appropriation settlements are made.
It has some interesting philosophical implications, at any rate. Galtieri gazed at the floor and rubbed his chin. But has it any use as it stands? Professor Borge appeared to debate within himself before replying.
It has occurred to me that my machine accomplishes in the ultimate degree the art of the painter or still photographer. Such people, if they have genius, do not bother themselves with the bland reporting of facts. Their art is to capture the moment, the curve of an extended hand caught in sunlight, the fleeting expression on a girl's face, the perception of living evanescent being. My machine produces the very state of awareness the artist strives for, heightened intensity of vision uncluttered by thought or preoccupation with ego. With the added with the you did it again. With the added memory facility, it snatches moments out of time and preserves their authentic identity. Perhaps some way could be found to project this awareness of being through a viewer. It would be a considerable advance as a camera.
Having reached the climax and object of his intrusion, Professor Borge busied himself replacing the machine in its case with loving care.
I hope you do not mind dining so late, Senor Galtieri, but I did not want to disturb you needlessly. A meal is on order in the dining room. Professor Amadeo Vegas and Dr. Professor Amadeo Vegas and Dr. Herrera Fraga will be joining us.
Yes, that will be fine. Let me freshen up a little first.
Then, if it meets with your requirements, I will return in 20 minutes.
Of course.
The professor glanced at his watch. Carefully, his feet making no noise on the floor for all his physical awkwardness, he crept from the room. The food was unremarkable. Prime beefsteak in a krill and chili sauce. Vegas and Fraga were not dissimilar in type to their colleague Borges, retiring, erudite, and physically soft. If this was the academician norm, then Mengele, Galtieri realized, was unusual. It was of Mengele, clearly held in high regard, that they spoke.
Of course, genetics is traditional in his family,
Fraga told Galtieri.
You know, I suppose, that he is the son of great Dr. Mengele who did such valuable work in the 20th century. That Mengele?
Galtieri raised his eyebrows.
Yet he does not look at all Teutonic. He is definitely swarthy, in fact. His mother's influence. He is a proud Hispanic.
Hmm.
The old Dr. Mengele concerned himself with the creation of a biological master race, did he not?
Yes, Vegas answered. It was a particular historical preoccupation of the time, but you will find Mengele sensitive and evasive if you try to question him about it.
Indeed. Tell me, is it true his father succeeded in cloning Adolf Hitler?
There were smiles.
That is an unsupported rumor, Vegas said. Very likely he tried, but failed. Cloning a higher mammal is rarely successful even now. Mengele himself only laughs when the subject is raised.
Borge made a musing voice.
Isn't it a little curious that the doctor should restrict himself to plant genetics? His father's specific interest was the human genotype, yet I recall that cloning was originally a gardener's technique, known as vegetative propagation.
You imply a direct and indirect attack on an old problem?
Fraga asked.
I would suggest a different explanation,
butted in Professor Vegas. He had been introduced to Galtier as hailing from the psychological lodge. Blech.
The old Mengele drew a deal of criticism for having carried out research using human subjects. It is possible this criticism is what caused his son to turn aside from warm-blooded organisms. That does seem overly sensitive, Galtieri remarked.
Did you ever hear the story of the portrait painter who was beaten and crippled by a street mob? As he lay in the gutter, a dog licked his wounds. For that, one of the mob promptly killed it with a stick. From that time on, the portrait artist painted only animals.
Galtieri frowned. He could not see the point of the story.
What can you tell me about the demonstration tonight? Mengele has told me very little.
We had better not tell you anything. Mengele would be very annoyed if we stole his thunder. He can be very touchy. Peeved, Galtieri laid down his napkin. He glanced at Borges's box, which the professor had carried into the dining room and placed close by him.
Professor Borges has told me of the macroscope project, he said, deciding to change the topic. That is not a prohibited subject, I suppose? Not at all, smiled Dr. Fraga. It is a waste of time, that is all. It is all a waste of time, that is all. As I have already told Professor Borges many times, the macroscope already exists in the form of astrology. Every horoscope is a macroscope.
Galtieri slapped his thigh and laughed.
So what do you say to that, Professor?
Borges's reply was bland.
Superficially, the argument is appealing, but the horoscope maps features already visible to the eye.
Ah, you forget the psychological aspects, Fraga retorted. Astrology is not child's play.
Perhaps, Borges said. By the way, Senor Galtieri, Mengele himself said something rather odd. He told me yesterday that the new plant he has created may turn out to be the very macroscope we seek. A strange outcome for plant genetics, if so.
Midnight was approaching by the time the leisurely meal was finished. Galtieri grew impatient. He refused a cigar, but was obliged to wait while the others smoked theirs. Finally, Borges scrutinized his watch.
It is time. Mengele said to arrive at 11:45.
He picked up his machine as they rose from the table. A short walk through dark wood corridors brought them to the open air, and Galtieri found it bitterly cold at this hour. Soon, however, they were in a large glass-walled building which by contrast was hot and steamy. By the cold light of the moon and of a few glimmering night lamps, a veritable jungle was revealed. Masses of orchids nestling amid dark green growths consisting of broadsword-shaped leaves, many of which towered over their heads. Borges nudged Galtieri's elbow.
The floricultarium, he whispered, as though they were in a library. Mengele's pride and joy. Many rare specimens are here. This, for instance.
He pointed to a drooping stem bearing a close-leafed bud. It struck Galtieri as insipid among so many gorgeous blooms. It was not even in flower. He failed to catch the Latin syllables which Borges uttered at him. The rank odor of the place was already making him feel slightly bilious.
The doctor maintains several other culture houses, Borges continued, still in hushed tones, as well as an arboretum close to the new forest. His study of plant life is comprehensive. Ah, here is Dr. Mengele now.
Pale light behind him, a tall, saturnine figure, became framed in a doorway at the far end of the glasshouse. The doctor called out to them.
Come in at once. There is barely time for explanation.
They quickened their pace, approaching through tangled rows of fleshy petal. His curiosity by now at high pitch, Galtieri entered a smallish, quiet room with all the contemplative atmosphere of a shrine. Its shape was oval. The walls were screened by plush lavender drapes, except at the far end where the oval motif was echoed in the shape of an ornately framed hanging mirror. A circular well filled with earth occupied the center of the tiled floor. Planted in it was what Galtieri took to be a bush standing about 4 feet high. On looking more closely, however, he wasn't so sure. The
bush was roughly spherical in shape, considerably flattened on top, but its finely brachiated structure was not, perhaps, quite bush-like. It appeared to be composed not of twigs and leaves, but of spindly, many-hued moss. Through this fuzzy reticulated forest one could see right to the heart of the plant. Gazing at it for more than a few moments made the bush seem to shimmer. Being no botanist, and scarcely knowing one plant from another, Galtieri could not say if the bush was anything unusual. More surprising was to see Borges open his case and proceed to set up the seeing machine on the floor, angling the concave receptor so as to take in the plant. "Why are you doing that?" he murmured.
To capture the moment, Senor Galtieri,
Borges muttered. He appeared slightly embarrassed.
to extend the machine's experience.
Closing the door behind them, Dr. Mengele strode to a section of drape and pulled a tasseled cord. The drape drew aside to reveal a VDU and keyboard. Mengele depressed a key. The display screen came alive and split, portraying multi-trace oscillations on one half and ever-changing scripted data on the other. Galtieri also noted what appeared to be a countdown in seconds. Mengele turned to face them. He frowned momentarily at the seeing machine, then began to speak.
Senors, for what I have to show you is not only a victory for Argentinian science, but may be of considerable significance for life on our planet. To be brief, some years ago I engaged myself upon a study of what are known as phytoalexins. This is a term covering all those substances which plants manufacture to defend themselves against disease or injury. Quinine, cocaine, natural antibiotics, the active agents in herbal remedies, and various psychotropic drugs are examples of the way these substances have entered into human usage since early times, and of course modern research has extracted thousands more such agents from the plants around us. The truth is that the resources of botanical nature exceed by far the inventiveness and capacity for synthesis possessed by any pharmaceutical industry, and have scarcely been touched by us as yet. I have no doubt that cures for every conceivable disease, and agents for inducing every possible psychological state, are to be found in some little known and unregarded plant or other. Yes, the vegetable kingdom is far wiser than we are. Is it any wonder? Plant life made an empire of Earth millions of years before Metazoa appeared. From the first it was assailed by bacteria and later by fungi, but it learned to resist all onslaughts and went from strength to strength. It has had all that while a measure of time incomparably longer than our short span in which to face the rigors of life and to add to its knowledge and capability.
Galtieri noted with what assurance Mengele spoke, now that he was on his own subject. There was little trace of the shy, nervous man earlier in the day. His manner amounted almost to arrogance.
What are we to make of the vastness of this vegetable wisdom? He went on slowly. Such arcane and fathomless chemistries must betoken an ability, yes, even an intelligence, superior to our own. Is this an absurd proposition? Yes, to our minds it must be, because there is a fundamental difference between plant and animal life which we assume to be decisively in our favor. I refer to the fact that I refer to the fact that an animal, particularly a mammal, is a highly individualized being. Plants, by contrast, are relatively non-individual. Incidentally, this is what makes it perfectly simple to clone a plant, whereas it is very difficult to clone a higher mammal. When we look at a plant, therefore, we are apt to be unimpressed by it as an entity. Yet take away the presumption that to be an individual is all that matters, and what a vista the plant world represents! Indeed, who is to say that our hyper-individualized mode of existence, our insistence on clinging to our individual consciousness and our most precious possession, may not be a dead end?
Will not the grass of the pampas outlive the entire human species? Even the entire animal kingdom, perhaps? Again Mengele paused to consult the VDU. As he touched a key, a series of gentle, randomly changing tones emanated from a speaker. Galtieri knew the trick. Every living organism generated electric fields. Convert them to sound by means of a transducer, and the electrical sensitivity of a plant became audible. Senores, our discussion begins to enter the intuitive philosophical sphere, Mengele resumed. So let us quit this over-mechanistic century and return to an age more imbued with great ideas, specifically to the age of Goethe, the towering thinker and dramatist who was the author of Faust. Goethe felt himself obliged to fight a rearguard action against the march of reductionism in the life sciences, indeed against the whole concept of progressive evolution, and he denied flatly the modern view that species somehow lift themselves by their bootstraps as they radiate and diversify across the planet. With regard to plant life, at any rate, he believed the reverse, that the entire vegetable kingdom has devolved from a single fabulous primordial plant, the Urpflanz, or Ur-plant, a plant containing the characteristics of every possible future plant, and which has suddenly appeared on the bare earth, I suppose, as a direct expression of the creative spirit abroad in the world. Every vegetable variety and species now existing, according to Goethe, is a fragment of this original magical master plant. I see you smiling, Dr. Fraga, and of course the Ur-plant could never have existed physically on the primitive Earth. Yet I contend that Goethe's intuition was sound. He perceived that the vegetable kingdom has a non-individual content, that it comprises, so to speak, scattered parts of one huge entity. In his mind's eye, he saw the Ur-plant. The Ur-plant. His mistake was in supposing that it lay in the past instead of the future.
I think I'm mangling Goethe's name. If so, sorry. Um, Goethe, Goethe, Goethe. After a glance at his watch, Mengele quickened his speech slightly.
Senores, you know that I am the son of another great man who taught me all there is to know on the subject of genetic manipulation. My research into I'll never get that right. Phyloatexins. That's not that hard. My research into phyloatexins led me to conceive a great work, the fusing together of the genetical heritage of the entire botanical biosphere. Just as in cloning, nucleic fusion can be accomplished much more easily with plant cells than with animal. Obviously, not every single variety and species could contribute. It would take 1,000 years, and therefore selection was the first stage to contemplate. In this I worked by instinct, by intuition almost, I felt, by divine guidance. I tackled the problem at the source, spending 2 reclusive years in the depths of the Amazonian Reserve, still Earth's largest rainforest and a fabulous treasure house from the botanist's point of view. There I discovered no less than 59 unrecorded species, many with marvelous properties. If the Ur plant if the Ur plant were ever at some date to come about by spontaneous hybridization, then the reserve is where the miracle would occur. But we have no need to wait for nature to accomplish the work. Senores, for I, at last, succeeded in creating the master plant. What you see before you is none other than Goethe's Ur-plant, which has existed on Earth as a spiritual presence for all these eons, and now exists as a reality. Genes from nearly 5,000 distinct species are blended into its enormous chromosomes. It has every conceivable vegetable capability. It does not look much like the primordial plant that is all plants, I see you remarking to yourselves. Should not such a plant be a prodigious mixture of features, an explosion of leaves, stems, woods, and flowers? And so it is. But these features are potential, resident in its genes, and will express themselves as the occasions arise in the course of its eons-long lifetime. There is no substance with an organic or psychological role that this plant cannot synthesize, no vegetable structure it cannot give forth. If by some mischance all other plant life on earth were destroyed, and this alone remained, it would act as Goethe believed it originally acted, propagating and devolving into all species and varieties. I come now to the reason why I asked you here on this specific date, at this specific time. The truth is, senors, that I am responsible only in part for the Ur plant's genetic architecture. In the course of its development, many qualities emerged which I could not have foreseen, but which are derived, I would posit, from the Platonic spirit of the Ur plant that has always been with us. Among these features are its clocks. All living organisms incorporate internal clocks, often capable of remarkable patience and precision. There is, for instance, an orchid in the jungles of Malaya which blooms but once in 10 years and remains open for no more than a few minutes. In that brief time the requisite insect must find it, must enter and deposit pollen taken from a similar orchid. Surprisingly, the Ur plant is like this flowering orchid. It blooms but once in 1,000,000 years, whereupon its flower remains open for approximately 9 seconds. I say, surprisingly, for we should ask ourselves, what does it stand ready to receive? Certainly not pollen from another Ur plant. It requires none. It is completely self-sufficient. Whatever it is can be expected to commensurate with the scale of being of the Ur plant itself, and we may learn its nature in a very short while, senores, before, if my calculations are correct, the orchid will unfold at 2 minutes past midnight. Mengele stepped again to the keyboard. The countdown was approaching 0 when he raised the sound volume so that the pleasant tones of the Ur plant filled the room. Suddenly they altered in character. New tones were added. The changes in pitch increased in pace, became more melodic, less random, as the ensemble as the ensemble swelled upwards towards a climax. It was, Galtieri thought, like Mozart at his most ethereal. It was, well, but no, the music had no vestige of tonality. Mozart interpreted by Schoenberg, unearthly, strange, interspersed with chords that could never, somehow, quite become familiar. That was not all that was happening. He had scarcely noticed the little bud in the middle of the flattened top of the bush. It seemed incredible that so gigantic a flower could emerge, and at so rapid a rate, from so small a space. And of all the fantastic shapes and brilliant colors of exotic flowers found in the forests of the world, this was surely the most fantastic. Fields of pure snow, shining in radiant sunlight, could not compete with its dazzling whiteness, which was fringed with rippling rainbows. In graceful, curving arcs, it stretched itself fully 6 feet from rim to rim, presenting a tremulously expectant floral radar dish to the zenith. And to the heavenly music, to the blinding whiteness, was added a third element, for the flower exuded an overpowering perfume. Galtieri's consciousness began to swim, to sink. There was a hint of roses in the perfume, of jasmine, of sharp pine. What did it not have a hint of? But it was strong, too strong, and it was drowning him. Galtieri felt his knees buckle, and as he fell he saw the others around him stagger, too, then collapse like rag dolls. He was on the floor, his cheek against the cold tile. Then he seemed to lose all contact with his senses. Instead of the floor, he was lying on a bare, gravelly mound, which in some way he understood to be the planet Earth, a dank-smelling hill surrounded by an indistinct void. A presence was in this void, and it spoke, but not in words, and not to him. With each unpersonalized statement, tangled images flashed out in the apparently empty void. Arboretic, dendritic images of fern and flower, bush and branch. The presence seemed never to stop speaking, had been speaking all the time. A pause, an aside. Let us see that new branch that started. The bosky tangle vanished, and instead he saw the figure of a man, as if in an anatomy book. In one shiver of cognizance, every somatic system was gone through: nervous, pulmonary, vascular, lymphatic, skeletal, immune. The man was turned inside out, then dropped into the void like a discarded leaf. But not before Galtieri glimpsed the face of the man. It was not modern man, not Hispanic man, or Aryan man, or even Cro-Magnon man. Not really any man, more reminiscent of those human types said to predate Homo sapiens sapiens, with the low, swept-back brow, the protruding jaw, the posture that was not, yet, quite erect. A question burst forth, almost agonizedly, from Galtieri's mind. Where are the individuals? There weren't any. There were models, Geists, the annihilating of congregations into pure abstractions. Even the speaking presence was not an individual, though the wordless voice remained, as the image of man disappeared. Here is your gift, your fecundation. Something fell from far above, a golden, fermenting haze. Blurring like rain on a window, the vision faded, the voice receding into inaudibility. Galtieri discovered that he lay nowhere. He was still on his feet, gazing at the Ur plant. No one had collapsed to the floor, and everything was as it had been, except that the bloom that had dazzled, blinded, and drugged him had already withered, and hung from its supporting stem, shriveled to the size of a dead oak leaf. The electrostatic music, too, had subsided to a soporific monotone, rising and falling in a banal tune, sated detumescence. Mengele moved to kill both screen and speaker. His eyes were afire. There you have it, senors. You have just witnessed an event that, quite possibly, will not be repeated in the lifetime of our species. A dead silence descended on the room. Galtieri settled in his seat with a grunt, lulled by the quiet whistle of the plane's engine. His official car was in the cargo hold, but he had scorned the passenger compartment, where he had only the chauffeur for company, and had come to sit with the pilot. From here he had a better view of the green and brown landscape as it passed below. That morning Dr. Mengele had breakfasted with him, asking if he had any further questions. Galtieri had shaken his head dumbly. For some reason he could not bring himself to discuss his experience of the night before with the doctor. Then may I be rash enough to ask how you judge my request? I will make arrangements for a team to guide you into the Amazonian reserve, Doctor. You may plant your monster in a place of your choosing. Galtieri rubbed his chin. Will it propagate itself, do you think? I do not know. Perhaps there does not need to be more than one specimen. I see. But you don't think there could be any danger to ourselves, do you? To mankind, I mean? Of course not, Mengele had replied curtly. Does a dog present a danger to the fleas that inhabit it? That should have been an end of the matter, but before leaving Academisia, he could not resist calling on Professor Borges. He had found the professor in a state of high excitement, staring fixedly at the seeing machine. He had installed it in his quarters in a niche in the wall, where it was flanked by floor-to-ceiling bookcases.
Senor Galtieri, what are you doing here?
Borges cried in a voice almost of alarm. I came to say goodbye. Galtieri glanced from Borges to the seeing machine and back again. Are you sure you are all right? Professor, I wanted to mention something. I experienced a peculiar sensation during last night's demonstration.
Don't be shy. It happened to all of us. It was real.
Galtieri was not sure if the news relieved him or not. In that case, Professor, I would value your interpretation. Do you think... Borges took a step towards him and stared straight into his face.
The ancient doctrines are true, he said. Do you know the visions of Zosimos, the 3rd century alchemist? The stars gave and the flowers receive. There it is, in black and white, what Goethe knew instinctively and Dr. Mengele has now proved.
Receive? What do they receive?
Pollen, said Borges, staring harder. Star pollen! What is pollen? It is fertilizing information. It is fertilizing information. That is all. The genes are all in code. Some kind of information-bearing energy was donated to the plant last night. Exactly what, I do not know. I only know that the entity donating it communicates constantly with our Earth, yet it lives on so vast a timescale that it does not see us at all. It does not see generations or species or probably even genera. What it talks to are orders and classes, perhaps entire phyla. No wonder it is a Platonic abstraction as far as we are concerned. Yet we felt its presence, did we not? For a moment, while we stood near it, the plant was indeed Dr. Mengele's promised macroscope.
He turned away as if in a trance to stare at the seeing machine again. Has that thing got you hypnotized? Galtieri asked suspiciously, and was taken aback by the vehemence of Borges' retort.
Do not jest, Senor Galtieri. The machine was there too, remember, and just before the plant bloomed, I pressed the memory key. Do you still not understand? The machine becomes what it sees, and it saw a god.
A god? Galtieri echoed incredulously, and Borges instantly blurted out,
Yes, a god has come down from the stars and dwells with us in my machine. Its being, its identity, its awareness is there, perceiving us now. A god, not an angel, not anything the church teaches. So what do you please, Senor Galtieri? Report me to the Holy Office if you must. So do what you please, Senor Galtieri. Report me to the Holy Office if you must. Nail me upside down to a cross as you did the Anglican Protestants. You will not make me recant.
and Galtieri, fearing the professor was about to fall to his knees, had stalked out in disgust. The pampas, dotted with brown and black specks that were cattle, crawled by below. Galtieri thought he knew now what Professor Vegas had been trying to imply with his story of the portrait painter. Yes, he recalled that the old Dr. Mengele had for a time become almost infamous. He had been unfairly accused, of course. No scientist worth his salt would be able to resist an opportunity to study real rather than surrogate subjects. But evidently the son was a sensitive soul, while still fired, for all that, by his father's great ideal of genetic excellence. Exactly what had happened the previous night still puzzled Galtieri slightly. That his vision was chemically induced he did not doubt, but he rejected the notion that Mengele himself had introduced a drug into the air of the room. A Mengele could not be so underhanded. Presumably, then, whatever it was had been exuded by the genetically modified plant as a particularly potent kind of perfume. He forced the memory from his mind, and resolved to restrict philosophical questions to his bedtime reading in future. Practical affairs were more important, and these required his undivided attention. 1. To re-establish the northern frontiers of Greater Argentina. 2. To regain control of the southern Atlantic. 3. At any cost to defend Antarctica, which would be made habitable one day and peopled entirely by Argentinians, would would become the greatest power on Earth. Oh, I see. There's supposed to be an extra comma or two there. 3. At any cost to defend Antarctica, which would be made habitable one day, and, peopled entirely by Argentinians, would become the greatest power on Earth. He smiled to think of poor Borges. He really did seem to think Galtieri would report him to the Holy Office. He would not do any such thing, of course. But imagine the professor kneeling in worship before his data machine, as though before a Madonna. The picture made Galtieri burst out laughing. The pilot grinned in sympathy. Something amuses you, senor? Ah, it is these scientists, Galtieri chuckled. I tell you, Lieutenant, they are all as crazy as gringos. And that was The Ur Plant by Barrington Bailey. Barrington Bailey has been publishing SF for nearly 30 years and is renowned for the originality of his ideas. Some of his best short stories are to be found in the collection The Knights of the Limits. His most recent novel is The Pillars of Eternity. I think I've heard of The Pillars of Eternity. I don't think I've ever read it. The Knights of the Limits, I haven't. I have not heard of this author offhand. I do find it very interesting that it comes very close to touching on some of what Blindsight touched on in terms of consciousness and awareness being kind of ancillary to life and not necessarily the evolutionary advantage that we think it is. Or evolutionary necessity for intelligence, I should say, that we generally think it is. Also, the overlap with The Green Brain by Frank Herbert, which is, I mean, it's a novel, but it's not a super long one. It's pretty good. In the idea of plant life as a collective intelligence sort of thing. So some interesting overlap. I'd actually have to check if this was 1983. This was 1983. When was The Green Brain published? Let's go to Frank Herbert bibliography. There it is. The Green Brain, 1966. So was originally a serial publication in Amazing Science Fiction under the title Green Slaves, which tells you a little bit of something about what that story's about, kinda. Of course, he also did similarly Hellstrom's Hive, which is also kind of doing the whole hive mind idea, collective intelligence thing. Hellstrom's Hive is pretty good. I think there was actually a movie made based on Hellstrom's Hive. It's not called that, and it doesn't credit Hellstrom's Hive, as far as I know. I saw it, and I was like, I've read this book. I've absolutely read this book. And if you look on the Wikipedia page, which I am doing right this moment, I am seeing no reference to the movie. I can't remember the name, so of the movie. If anybody can remember the name of the movie, if anybody here has read Hellstrom's Hive, and if anybody can remember the name of the movie that clearly is based on Hellstrom's Hive, it's like from the 70s or 80s, I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure it's the 70s. or early 80s. Definitely, 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 definitely post it in the comments. Um, quite good. It's probably something like the Wasp Women, honestly, because I know there's a Wasp Women movie. Um, the Wasp Women. Nah, it wasn't that old. No. There's the Wasp Woman, who is a literal wasp woman. Interestingly, that predates it. It's not this, though. Yeah, no, it's like, that one's like The Fly. Because I've looked into this, and it drew me nuts. There's a 95 Wasp Woman movie. Does it have an actual mutant wasp person? No, this isn't it. Yeah, it's got an actual mutant. Because this is nothing like that. It's people who become a hive mind, a matriarchal hive mind. Movie based on Hellstrom's Hive. There's the Hellstrom Chronicle. What year? 71. That'd be pretty close. No, that's not it. Apparently, wait a minute. If this was, oh, it was published in 73. Oh, okay. What? Then why does this say 60 something? Oh, I was thinking of the Green Brain. Sorry, no, Hellstrom's Hive is 73. And is apparently inspired by the Hellstrom Chronicle, according to Frank Herbert. But there is another movie that is not that movie. It's not Phase 4. I've seen that. That's the Ant one. Whatever. At any rate. Wow, I would be blown away if it actually was based on a and I had the order wrong my entire life. This entire time. That would be pretty wild. That'd be pretty nuts. That'd be pretty nuts. Let me see some images, please. Give me an image from this film. Maybe several. That'd be good. The Hellstrom Chronicle. The Hellstrom Chronicle. The Hellstrom Chronicle. Let's check images. Nope, that's not it. I have very vivid memories of what it looked like, and these are not it. Oh well, c'est la vie. In any case, that'll do it for today. Hopefully people enjoyed the short stories. I'll be gone for the next couple weeks, and we'll resume this. We'll probably get started on doing Under Pressure by Frank Herbert. That's kind of what I want to get started on because I like the book. Alrighty. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good one. Stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other, and see you all next time.